I'm Scott Lucas. This is EAWorldView on Syria. Today, why are the Islamists winning? In recent weeks in the Western press, especially in the United States, there's been an emerging theme that Islamists are winning the battle in Syria, at least among the insurgency. Sometimes that analysis, or supposed analysis, is actually quite hysterical and close to useless. Labels like Al-Qaeda are thrown about. There are terms like Sharia law as supposedly sweeping through Syria. There are questions about terrorist and extremist. Sometimes the analysis is better. References to specific brigades. For example, an article in the last week about al-Sham, an article that identified correctly that this brigade is the largest amongst the insurgency, and identified, again quite correctly, that it has been very successful in fighting in Syria, from Aleppo, Syria's largest city, throughout the north. The question I want to address, however, is why are Islamist brigades succeeding both in military terms and quite often politically and socially? Here's the three-point guide. Point 1, religion. Religion matters, but not in the scary way that it's often invoked, that some form of dangerous, maniacal Islam is going to take over Syria. It matters because on the ground, people who fight wars want a cause to believe in. And quite often, people who support fighters who fight wars want a cause to believe in. For all the talk about democracy and freedom and a new Syria that we saw in the protests from March 2011, a long, bloody, protracted conflict often means that you have to go beyond that. And one way to organize and to believe that you have to keep fighting is to say that your religious cause is just. That is perhaps why the two major insurgent factions that have emerged in Syria on the battlefield have been the umbrella group called the Syria Islamic Liberation Front and another group called the Syria Islamic Front. That notion of an Islamist state or an Islamic state is one that holds people together. It's much more tangible than just talking about a collection of freedoms or about a democracy, which actually means little in practice when you talk about the day-to-day realities of being able to live, survive, and not be defeated by the Assad regime. Point 2, weapons. A very different reason for the success of Islamic brigades is quite simply that they are better armed than other groups within the insurgency. Why are they better armed? This has probably nothing to do with religion as much as it is to do with networks of opportunities. For example, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have been arming insurgents for more than a year. The brigades they work with are often called Islamic. Those networks continue, and indeed they have been stronger than networks in the South, where the U.S. reluctance to provide weapons has limited what other groups in the Free Syrian Army can get and can use. Equally important, there is evidence that the Free Syrian Army, or at least a faction of it, have sat on their arms. They have not been providing weapons to the major battlefields and the major fronts, especially in northern Syria. The Islamic brigades, such as al-Sham, Liwa al-Tawhid, have been quite willing to use those weapons. So have Jabhat al-Nusra. If you are better armed, you're more likely to succeed. If you're better armed, you're more likely not only to succeed because you have supplies from outside, but because you can use supplies that you get from winning. In other words, captured stock from the Syrian military. Point 3, organization. Organization counts on the battlefield. One of the problems for the loose umbrella that we call the Free Syrian Army is that its brigades don't necessarily coordinate, link up on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, there have been many problems, especially in recent months in the South, in not only trying to fight against the Assad regime, but in trying to resist it. In the north and in the east, however, brigades have been much more tightly organized. They haven't had internal squabbles. They've been able to launch campaigns and to sustain them. That organization, again, with al-Sham, has been notable. But it's not just organization on the battlefield. It's also organization politically and socially. Because once you win a battle, you have to go in and organize services. You have to go in and organize propaganda to promote what you're doing with those services. And it's been quite notable that, say, Jabhat al-Nusra, the supposed terrorist group, has been doing that in northern Syria. It's quite noticeable that al-Sham has been doing that in areas that it has taken over in northern Syria. And yes, it is quite noticeable that the Islamic State of Iraq, that group that has been emerging in the conflict in recent months, has also been trying to organize services, say in a city like Raqqa, say like a small town like Aldana. Saying that provision of services and propaganda is occurring does not make these the good groups. It just means that they're better organized than other groups, the supposed moderate groups within the insurgency. Because at the end of the day, the moral judgment is not what matters here. What matters for success is organization, weapons, and resources, backed up in this case by an ideology. But Islamist is just a term. It's not the end point of what is happening in Syria. I'm Scott Lucas. This has been EA Worldview on Syria for today.